Alrighty, guys. Hope everyone's doing well and having a great start to their week. We managed to get Doc Spears back. I'm very excited not only for him to get to finish his story today that we covered in part one, that will be in the show notes to those of y'all that might not have watched the first part or maybe had some questions about what he was doing or up to or who he was with. You can go back and watch that because we got some good questions out to cover. But we're also going to be covering what Mr. John was doing last week when he was at the sniper competition that I think we're going to find pretty interesting, along with talking about his career and being a plank holder in the Army Sniper School. So, but I think where we're going to start off today is we're going to be talking about a man that Mr. John worked with and was, I believe, gosh, I don't think he was the first FS death, but
He was.
Mr.
He was the first Special Forces combat casualty in El Salvador.
Wow, Mr. Greg Fronius, death attack on El Paricio in March of 1987. Would you care to talk a little bit about him and let us know about him?
We went in great detail on the attack on El Pariso that resulted in Greg's death during his valorous action to bolster the defense of the brigade compound against the guerrilla attack. And we went into a lot of detail about all of that and the whole worldwide situation that by the communist terror network that really, it's like I say, the whole world Marxist terror network that night combined to try to kill Greg. And that's what he was up against. But he was a wonderful guy. We were both in B Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group. I was in the country when he got killed at another site working with one of the immediate reaction battalions. As I talked about in part one, we were all quite separated. And there, El Salvador was accurately described as Vietnam with no support. And in the entirety of the country, there's probably less than 2 A teams worth of special forces operators who were working the counterinsurgency for the duration of the civil war in El Salvador. Greg was a wonderful guy. Had a young family. He was on ODA 781, one of the primary Halo teams. I was on ODA 783. And, all of us, all teams, everybody was very close. The way things worked back in those days, it was very, very common to form composite teams out of whoever was available for a mission because there were so many individual and small team missions going all over Central and South America back in the 80s that we all worked together, even all 3 companies, the Scuba Company, the Halo Company, and the Special Operations Company, what became the CIF, the Commanders and Extremist Force. Everybody knew each other. Everybody worked together on all kinds of projects, and it was just a great atmosphere. But Greg was a well-loved guy. He had a heck of a sense of humor. One personal thing about him is he grew up a carny. He knew all of those sleight of hand tricks and like money changing. He is that guy, and he would do it in Spanish too, where it's like, oh, let me buy this. Let me give you a 20. Oh, no. Give me back the 20. Let me give you 2. Okay, I'll give you this and you give me that. And he would do it just on a lark. And I would see him just for fun. It's like, say, he could do it in Spanish. And there wasn't anywhere you went with the guy, where, he never gave a sucker an even break. And he was hilarious. But I mean, he was a dependable guy. Don't get me wrong. But, it was entertaining to watch him do that kind of stuff. But he got killed that night. I talked a little bit about those circumstances. One thing that comes up, not a lot has been written about it. Not a lot is known about it because, again, there was only a handful of us who were in country at any given time, much less at that time. And part of the reason that I'm so grateful to be able to talk about these things is that a lot of us are dying. A lot of my friends who I was there with aren't with us anymore. So I kind of feel a responsibility to tell the story, because the story of the Special Forces mission in El Salvador and its success should be known everywhere, but especially appreciated by the current operators in the Special Forces community. Initially, Greg's body was recovered. He was returned to Panama to his family. I was still in country in El Salvador when they had the ceremony back in Panama to inter him with his family. Like I say, he had a young wife, as I recall, 2 young children at the time. So it was very sad, very sad. But for many years afterwards, it was a big point of contention that his death in active combat was not recognized with a combat award for valor. Now, we talked about that last time. From the national level of the Reagan administration, it was tacitly understood that any Special Forces combat action in El Salvador would be denied and would be attributed to other causes. And that certainly did play a role in why Greg was not immediately recognized for his valorous combat action. But there's actually a more concrete reason why that didn't happen. Initially, is the leadership made sure that he was given a meritorious service medal, which is a non-combat award. And it's stuck in the craw of a lot of people. And there was a very significant reason for that. And I don't think it's ever been discussed before. But the very mature people in 3rd Battalion realized that Greg had a private life insurance policy. And most life insurance policies have a war clause exemption. So, for an E6 with a young family, a Special Forces guy drawing jump pay and, combat pay 6 to 9 months out of the year, depending upon where he was working. In 1987, I bet Greg was hauling in all of probably about $20,000 a year. And that Soldiers Group life insurance back in those days, I believe the payout was $35,000, which was not a heck of a lot of money. So, the guys on the ground back in Panama really quickly, got their act together and said, if Greg's got a private life insurance policy, what are the chances that if we try and get him the valorous combat commendation that he deserves, what's the chance that his life insurance carrier is going to disallow the payout to his family, which whatever amount it would have been very, very significant for them. And that's why the decision was made not to push for a Silver Star or something of that nature. And again, it's the nature of Special Forces, and to the great credit of anybody involved, that was not ever discussed. The reasons why that was. Members of the command group and the leadership who took a beating from the special operations community for not pushing for Greg to get a Silver Star, they bore that criticism unnecessarily, but with honor and for a good reason, because they were protecting Greg's family. Now, 10 years later, I believe, I was already out and deep in a surgical residency. But, I talked a little bit last time about Special Forces operator Greg Walker, who was very early in the Special Forces effort in El Salvador, and my friend at that time, Major John McMullen. Those guys I know were instrumental in making sure that the Special Forces guys who'd served in El Salvador got recognized for their combat service. And Greg later was awarded the Silver Star about 10 years later. to settle that issue. And that's I'm personally grateful to their efforts to see that Greg was recognized, and that the guys who served in El Salvador were recognized rightly for their combat service. They really did everybody a great service, and I only actually learned about that just like 5 or 6 years ago. My former team sergeant Tom Sneed had passed away in Fayetteville, and my old teammates reached out to me. Joe Crane, who was a very, very influential person in the special operations community, reached out to me, and we met at Fort Bragg. And this was only 6 or 7 years ago that I even learned that our combat service had been recognized, and CIBs and Valor Awards given out and things like that. And apparently it was one of the largest awards ceremonies the 7th Special Forces Group had ever seen in 98 or 99, whatever it occurred. But it was completely unknown to me. I was so deep in a 7-year surgical residency that I didn't come up for air or see daylight whatsoever. So I only learned about that just a handful of years ago. But
Wow.
that's another thing. It's really meant a lot to me to know that happened.
That's amazing. And did you say also that his family did receive the insurance? That's great. That
They
that
did.
eerily.
Like I say, all those guys fell on their swords for Greg and took a lot of unnecessary criticism from the special operations community
Mhm.
and never said a word, never tried to explain their way out of it. And, if I've never seen it written about or talked about anywhere, but I know factually that's what happened. I was there. I was a witness to it all. And like I say, everybody involved in, 3rd of the 7th leadership who made that decision and did so, they acted in the highest tradition of special forces, being silent professionals, and people should know that.
Wow, that's amazing, and that's kind of eerily it matches up not completely, but in a way with a SOG man I know that was leading a hatchet force mission, and Mr. Ken Sisler, who earned the Medal of Honor on that mission. And the man I know earned the DSC. He was the 1-0, if you will, or the
Mhm.
overall leader, but I think it was a hatchet force mission. But nonetheless, they had found out the man that died, Mr. Ken, had just been married, and I think either had 2 or 3 kids that had just been born. And Mr. Leonard Tilley was up for the medal, and they found out the benefits and all of that Medal of Honor families get even posthumously. And he was like, no, Sisler and his family deserved it. So he completely, he wrote it up on his end and said Sisler deserves it. And he ended up getting a DSC out of it. But it's eerie how it works like that. Guys taking care of a fallen teammate's family to make sure everything goes right with them, and not only getting the teammate, but the family taken care of.
Yep, it's it's like I say, special forces guys, uh, prefer silence over recognition by the outside world, and that is still the ethos. Is that, dudes, we all know what each other did, and that when somebody chooses you to go do something because they know that you're capable of doing the job, that's the highest compliment there is. But yeah, guys should be recognized. Off the subject, over the years I've gotten to know many special forces Medal of Honor winners and other very, very distinguished warriors, and they didn't go on to live easier lives as a result of their recognition.
No.
And I used to work for a guy, Pat Rogers, who I worked for him as a consultant and a weapons and tactics trainer in his company. And Pat had been a career Marine, and as a civilian, the Marine Corps hired him as the marksmanship instructor that stood up Marine Det 1, which is
Oh,
what became
Marsaw.
MARSOC. So Pat was a plank holder at MARSOC, and he had been a agency guy and he and I had met all over the world, and kind of led to me working for him in later years and things like that. But I learned a lot from Pat. And one of the things he told me that stuck with me forever was, show me a hero and I'll show you a drunk.
I've heard that from the Vietnam vets.
So, some of those guys, who went unrecognized for a long period of time, and some of those guys who probably should have got the Blue Max, the Medal of Honor, in some ways it saved them and maybe let them live more normal lives. But, that's just one opinion.
Absolutely. I agree. It can be somewhat, if you want to look at it in morose terms, it could almost be look at it in some men's curse to have to wear that the rest of their life and remember what all took place that day, So
hard to live up to that. I knew Major Howard not very well, but I knew Bob Howard a little bit, of course, in the Special Forces community. He wore it extremely well, I would say, and he certainly was larger in life.
Oh yeah, I was listening to a speech he was giving at I forgot, maybe a retirement ceremony or something, and his booming voice, the way he just commands a crowd, is captivating to hear him talking about people. It's amazing. You had mentioned earlier, kind of speaking about Mr. Greg not being able to kind of get it off the bat because of some secrecy going on and stuff like that, kind of like SOG wasn't really wanting to reward everyone with medals and everything. But we always hear these rumors from Soldier of Fortune or other vets about secret missions that may have occurred in El Salvador and who are run by OGA people, shall we say. What were any truth to that? What were there any secret missions going on over there?
It depends upon what you mean. Over the years, I have read or seen people from tier 1 units, or even from my own former unit, who've in public forums hinted at like secret like counter guerrilla assassination missions in El Salvador and things like that. And I wasn't everywhere in El Salvador, 27 for the entirety of the 10 years of war, but during the period of the years that I was there, I would have to say they would have been the most covert operations that were ever carried out, because neither me nor anybody else had any idea like anything like that was even going on.
Wow.
So it's like I say, some of those stories, in my opinion, attain like Chris Kyle levels of embellishment. That I hate to call somebody out, but they're flat out not true. However, it's like so much that is misunderstood about the special operations community and about special forces itself, and what comprises the depth and the breadth of what special forces does. Claims about like, secret like hit missions and stuff like that in the jungle, if they occurred, I would say that they're in absolutely no way as interesting as what actually occurred. And I can tell you that though I was fortunate to be part of that effort, and I think most all of us feel universally that by the nature of the limitations that were placed upon us and the necessity to run things the way we did to be successful and achieve the national security objectives that we were given by the National Command Authority, that we had to be silent professionals, and that's why you have special forces do these things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have standing to talk about some of the special access programs that went on in the country, and I've never heard them talked about, but we're getting on 40 years down the road, and I've never read about these things anywhere, but I will talk about at least one of the special access programs that went on there. I won't say the name of the program because I've never seen it published, but essentially the intelligence gathering component that kept the success of the war effort running was run entirely by special forces, operations and intelligence sergeants and warrant officers. And in each of the 6 war zones, the brigade zones in El Salvador and at other select military zones, there were regional intelligence centers, the RICs, and they were manned and operated by special forces, operations and intelligence sergeants and warrant officers who were working independently by themselves, many times without any support whatsoever. They lived and stayed in those regional intelligence centers, and they had the dream mission of any special forces O&I guy, who they did everything that the schoolhouse ever teaches or hints at doing. They ran they ran psyops campaigns. They ran their own intelligence and counter guerrilla action nets. They, gathered sources and ran agents. And, when the case officers left to fly on the black helicopter from their RIC back into the capital to the safety of their compounds every day, the SF O&I guys were the ones who were in the RICs 24/7, who kept the intel and the counter-terror programs running because they're the ones who ran them. And if everybody who served in El Salvador is kind of like the silent professional, the guys who had those missions, in my opinion, were the most important and unrecognized heroes in special forces throughout the 1980s. The stuff that my buddies did over there were simply legendary. And I'm not the guy who has the standing to reveal everything about that. And if somebody's got a case of the ass at me 40 years later for talking about it, sorry about that one. I'll probably get cancer and die next week, so you'll have your revenge. But that's one of those things I've never heard it talked about anywhere, in print or otherwise. And it's a very important part of the history and something that should be known.
It almost kind of sounds like, to be honest, in a weird way, it kind of sounds like Project Gamma in Vietnam, where they were running agents and turning agents and doing limited raids to see what their turned agents actually turned up and stuff. That's really interesting stuff, getting to hear about that. And you mentioned it was the O&I. Was it strictly SF O&I sergeants, or were there ASA, NSA, or was it just SF men running this?
It was 18 Foxes.
Wow. Heavy duty. Okay. Yeah.
No, great guys. And, and one of the reasons I'm talking about this is, I feel a certain debt to the current and future special forces operators. When I was down at Benning last week for International Sniper Comp, there were SF teams there, and I got to talk with all the teams were great, but got to talk to some fantastic dudes from First Group who they did very well. They're just awesome guys, but they saw the podcast and were asking me about it. And, that's very nice. And it's like I say, and the team sergeant, who is the coach for the team, he says, what that tells me is it gives me an idea about, capabilities and things that our regiment has done which means the experience is out there. And when the opportunity arises, those are the kinds of things that we need to be aware that we're probably going to be doing again. To which I said, that's exactly right. That's why I'm talking about all these things. You know, there's not a lot of contemporary knowledge about what SF is engaged with, even within the SF community. And what I've always said is the best way to know about what you need to be prepared for and what you need to be thinking about is looking at the history of what SF has done, because the world doesn't change, geopolitics doesn't change, SF's mission doesn't change, and the things that we have done and the way that we've done them, sure, the technology is better, sure, there are easier ways of doing things, but at the essence, what the mission is and the variety of those missions is going to be repeated and repeated and repeated in the future. And, you know, that's part of why I'm talking about these things, because as we've transitioned out of 20 years of a GWAT and are moving into another period where we are engaged against client states and associated actors from our primary opponents, these are the kinds of things that special forces are going to be doing more and more of again.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's why you see the Marine Corps looking back on the island hopping campaigns and the machine gunners doing all of their island warfare testing and all of that, and clearly looking back and trying to learn from history and get ready for future things. Like you said, history and geopolitics don't change very much.
Yep, and special forces are the foot soldiers of that foreign policy, whether they're doing so clandestinely, covertly, or overtly. That's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and do it well. We've heard some from prior guests that were over in El Salvador having some funny stories. Do you have any that stick out personally in your mind that are funny? Or shall we say interesting?
I have a lot of them. Right, gunfight stories are kind of boring, in my opinion. I like, but the next Chalatenango, El Pariso, 87. Like I say, that attack on the 4th Brigade where Greg got killed. I'll just say the FMLN is a catch-all for all of the guerrilla groups in El Salvador, but the FMLN could really get their act together to pull off one really major attack, terror type attack against infrastructure or against a brigade compound. They could do it about once a year. The next big attack that happened was in February of 88 in another part of the country called Usulatan. And I was on a national level mission with one other SF operator working out of the capital, and we were working with all units in the country. And my team sergeant was in Usulatan, the 6th Brigade, which that brigade was naval infantry, the Salvadoran Marines. So my team sergeant was the non-commissioned officer advisor to 2 Marine officers who were assigned as the operation plans and training team. And I worked with those guys a lot. I got everywhere around in the country on that particular mission. But I spent a lot of time in Usulatan in the 6th Brigade because my team sergeant was there. So it was great to always peel out and a week here and there and spend time down with those guys. And by the way, those Marine officers were like everybody in El Salvador. I really felt the country sent their best, and the gentlemen who were advising the Marine Brigade were the best of the best. They were fantastic individuals. I got to know them very well and work with them a lot. And if I could have issued them long tabs and green berets, I would have. That's how highly I thought of them. They were as individuals, they were extremely adaptive thinkers, and just they did a great job. I love those guys, and my team sergeant and them grew very, very close as well. But February of '88 was the next big guerrilla attack, and the guerrillas launched a simultaneous attack against the 6th Brigade compound, which is a large, what we called quartels. The quartel is a large, almost medieval looking fortress that's the base for the brigade, which in their case was essentially, like a lot of the brigades, in the center of an urban area, if you can imagine that, But the guerrillas launched pretty much a simultaneous attack against the brigade about midnight of the day of the attack. I don't remember the exact date. And they launched a separate attack elsewhere in Usulatan province against the cotton cooperative. Now, cotton, a very big crop and a big part of the economy of El Salvador. They launched an attack at the brigade compound, and I'll go back and tell the funny part of the story. And then they essentially destroyed I think it was about a third of El Salvador's cotton harvest and seed bank for the year. I was down there a few days after the attack, helping to investigate what happened, and just generally helping out, and inspected the site, and talking to captured guerrillas. Not me personally. I didn't interrogate any captured guerrillas. Americans didn't interrogate captured guerrillas. But talking to people who had been on the site, that the guerrillas essentially used homemade catapults and launched IEDs into the warehouses that were guarded by, as I recall, it was like a couple of dozen national policemen, on guard duty, guarding the cotton cooperative. And they pretty much overwhelmed and chased off the national police, catapulted IEDs into, these huge warehouses full of processed cotton goods and raw cotton seed and things like that, and then breached the wire and burned the entire production facility down. It was massive too. I have pictures of it somewhere, but it, from overhead when I was on that trip, but it just looks like, destroyed stuff out in the middle of a field. It's pretty interesting. Pretty much simultaneously, they attacked the 6th Brigade, but as opposed to the attack that had happened, the previous year in El Pariso, the guerrillas failed monumentally. Now, I was not there the night of the attack. I was at another brigade when it went down, but it's another case of you're listening, all communication in the country was by FM Motorola handset that was operated by a set of repeaters around the country. So again, that was another case. Here I was in another case. It's like, damn it, my team sergeant is there, Major Hernandez and Captain Longoria are there, my friend who was running the Regional Intelligence Center, the RIC, in the brigade compound. I won't mention his name because of who he was working for at the time, but he's there. So I got four very close friends who are under another major brigade attack, and I'm pretty pissed off that we're not getting mobilized to get in there and bring some relief to them. Part of that was the result of another incident where a bunch of people had gotten killed in a helicopter crash coming to the rescue of a wounded SF operator that resulted in a lot of fatalities. It had become kind of the tacit policy of the mill group commander, and I'm not criticizing him here, to say, like, we just don't have the capability to go somewhere in the middle of the night and drop in a mobile strike force or something like that. So it just wasn't an option. So it was another night where I was really pissed off and worried about the guys who were there and not able to help them. But I made it down. The attack ended, I think, about 3 or 4 in the morning. went on about 5 or 6 hours, maybe not quite that long. Unbeknownst to us at the time, a separate unit had destroyed the Cotton Cooperative, which is, of course, part of the Marxist terror program, that if they can destroy infrastructure through terrorism, they can hurt the economy, they can sap the populace's belief in the government and their ability to provide security for them. So it's all part of the same, terror campaign. I got down there as part of the relief force to help out the next day or the day after, and stuck around for a week or so helping my team sergeant out. So the story was this. So that was all build up to get into what the funny part was. If you can bear with me. So the night of the attack, a little earlier in the night, we had a commando section, small commando section. I want to say they weren't quite a platoon of Salvador Naval Infantry, the Marines, who were part of the 6th Brigade, and they were all really good kids. They were meat eaters, and I worked with those guys a lot, as many of us did, and they were very motivated and very well trained, and they acted as a reconnaissance and a small infiltration unit for the 6th Brigade. They were very experienced and good fighters. They were a bunch of fun guys, too. They were run by a Salvadoran sergeant, an E5, a guy whose name was Molina, who I knew really well. He had actually gone through the Salvadoran OCS process, and he graduated, but they didn't commission him for whatever reason, which was really a shame, because he was an outstanding leader, and he proved it that night. So where I'm going with this story is, the whole thing kind of started off is one of the commandos and another buddy whose kid, I can't remember the kid's name, but the one commando I'm going to tell the story about, his name was Chispay. Chispay it's Spanish or caliche for spark. So tells you something about, that this kid, kind of a bandy little, Salvadoran kid, that even among his people, his nickname was Spark, tells you something about what kind of guy this was. He was a good kid. So the night of the attack, he dropped by the advisor house, and the advisor house where my team sergeant of the Marines lived was actually not inside the brigade compound. It was outside of the walls of the brigade compound and just down one of the residential streets, maybe 100 yards or something like that. And they'd done a very, very good job reinforcing it and giving it security measures and putting bunkers on the rooftop and things like that. So it's a very secure site, maybe more secure than being inside the quartel compound. But it was really common for the commandos to drop by. So the story goes down, and Chispay and another commando come by the team house and bang on the door, half drunk, to come see my team sergeant and shoot the shit with them. And he chases them off. They return to the commando camp, and the commandos at the time were living outside the quartel. They were living just east of the walls of the 6th Brigade compound in tents, because there'd been a construction project going on in the quartel, and these guys had been displaced. So they just coincidentally happened to be outside of the brigade compound, in what you would say being outside of the brigade perimeter. And Chispay and this other commando kid, from a night on the town, half drunk, go back out in the dark to, basically the commando's campsite, and notice out, in the hinterlands, guerrillas doing IMTs, moving in line on the brigade compound. So by complete accident, several levels of accident, the guerrillas' movement into assault is discovered by these two commandos, half drunk, I might add, and they rush into the tent and wake up everybody, including Molina. They arm themselves immediately and go out there and spoil the guerrillas' assault on the 6th Brigade compound. Now, they did have an 81 millimeter mortar team, I think two. The guerrillas had a way where they they used improvised rifle grenades with their G3s. You know, the guerrillas they had FALs, they had M16s, you know, that mainly had been abandoned by the Salvadoran armed forces very early in the war, you know, FALs and G3s and stuff like that. But the guerrillas had kind of improvised rifle grenades that they could fire off the flash hider on the G3s, and they would take 308 cases, remove the bullets, and crimp the necks to use as a firing cartridge for the rifle grenades. So they assaulted the 6th Brigade compound, 81 millimeter mortars, rifle grenades. I think they did more of their catapult action with their IEDs, if you can imagine that, to attack the brigade compound. Long story short, the guerrillas got their asses kicked. I think as I recall, they estimated there were a force of about 400 guerrillas who attacked the compound, and our commando section spoiled their attack. A counterattack from the brigade got going. You know, there were other interesting things that happened, you know, like the Salvadoran Air Force, mobilized a couple of Mike ships, UH-1 Mikes that they had, Huey gunships, into the area, but they had no radio communications with the brigade. They communicated with our guys, my team sergeant and the Marines, by the Motorola, by the FM handset Motorola, which they couldn't even communicate directly with the Salvadoran air support. You know, they were communicating with the 3rd Brigade OPAT, which was a guy, Major Kevin Higgins, who became very, very important later in Special Forces in South America. He stood up Mission Colombia, a great guy, but I digress. So, you know, it highlights this whole problem, you know, with relying on close air support or anything from a host nation. If you can't communicate with them, you know, and they're up there, you know, running door guns and dropping flares, you know, are they shooting the bad guys? Or are they shooting, you know, are they doing a blue on blue? What are they doing? So it's a really chaotic situation, kind of funny in a way. My team sergeant and the Marines had pretty effective fire put on them from the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, and they returned effective fire and suppressed it. So after about 5 or 6 hours of that, finally the guerrilla attack was repelled. Very successful. You know, kudos all around. I made my way there. It was like the next day or the day after, and I was down there for about 4 or 5 days helping to put things together, still taking care of casualties. There's a lot of like local, you know, smaller wounds and casualties, especially among my commandos that, you know, I could just treat and they didn't have to leave to go to the military hospital or anything else like that. So anyway, big success. All right, so here we go with more funny parts of the story. So that little commando I told you about, Chispay, you know, who showed up at the team house drunk and went out and kind of like accidentally ruined the guerrilla surprise attack on the 6th Brigade compound. He got recognized for his heroism and got put in for what's essentially like the Salvadoran Medal of Honor.
Oh my God.
It's a pretty good deal, right? Pretty good deal. We're all proud of them. I was proud of all those guys. They were always a bunch of fun to work with. I spent as much time with them as I could. And I really, out of everybody I worked with, I loved those guys the most. They were so fantastic. Great kids. Chispay had a deformity of one of his fingers that he'd had since he was a kid. It's called I can't really read, but it's called a boutonniere deformity. And, you know, it's like everything down there. It's, you know, everybody's like, hey, John, can you fix that? You know, I never said no to anything, but this is one of those times where I said, no, I can't. I'm not a hand surgeon. And just coincidentally, it happened that coming up, there was going to be a rotation to the regional military hospital in San Miguel of a couple of orthopedic surgeons, of which one of them was going to be a hand surgeon who'd be visiting for like 30 days to work the Salvadoran surgeons. And I knew about this. And this was previous to the attack. I said, wouldn't it be great if we could get Chispay to see the hand surgeon and get that messed up finger of his fixed? Wouldn't that be awesome? And so I was able to help get that set up. Waiting for that to happen, the brigade attack goes down. Chispay's the hero of the day. He is going to get the Salvadoran Medal of Honor. You know, this little Indian Salvadoran kid, you know, couldn't weigh 120 pounds soaking wet. Just a real strong little war fighter. So I'm going to be down in Usulután for a week doing whatever I was doing down there. And when I left, I was going to take Chispay with me in the aircraft. I had permission from our air ops. It was all planned. And I was going to drop him off at the military hospital in San Miguel so that he could get his finger fixed. So this is now probably about a month after the attack on Usulután. I fly in, and the LZ is the soccer field inside the brigade compound. So I land and get out with all my junk and, you know, going to go over to the team house and see my team daddy, Tom Sneed, and see the Marines. And walking around the track around the soccer field inside the quartel is a dude carrying a huge tractor tire around his neck. If you can imagine that. Well, that was a form of corporal punishment, you know, like non-UCMJ punishment, if you will, in the Salvadoran army, where they do stuff like that, or like make them do like the monkey walk, you know, for all day long, or put that gigantic tractor tire around their neck and make them just do loops around the soccer field. And as he came close, I saw it was Chispay. He's walking around there, so it's clearly he's in trouble. He's being punished. So I can't figure it out, and I can't go talk to him, you know. So I beat it to the team house and catch up with Tom, my team snarcher. I go like, I just flew in, and what is happening with Chispay? I thought he's supposed to be getting like the Medal of Honor next week or something, and I'm supposed to be leaving with him to go get his finger fixed. And he goes like, he says, let me let you hear it from the source. And we go out to the commando compound to talk to Chispay's buddy and because he was a witness. And this is what happened. About a week before this, Chispay and his other commando buddy blew off guard duty, went into town to get drunk. And they're at a bar, and in the bar with them is some members of the local immediate reaction battalion, which I believe was Atonal. My memory fades, but think, you know, these dudes from Beauty Atonal are in the bar, and Chispay and this other commando are in the bar, and they're all strapped. And one of these Beauty Atonal guys looks over at Chispay and goes, "You think you're hot shit, don't you, Chispay?" Stands up and does like the Matt Dillon, like he's going to draw for his shit. And Chispay turns around, lays his hand on his shit and says, "Go for what you know." Quick draw in the bar. Chispay shoots this Atonal kid dead. DRT right there, which results in why he's walking around the brigade compound with his tractor tire around his neck. And I said, "Oh shit, at the end of the week, I'm supposed to take this guy to go." I go, "Let me go talk to the brigade commander and ask, you know, if we can make some kind of exception or something like that." So Team Daddy and I go and we find the colonel, and I make my plea. And, you know, the colonel was a very, very respectable gentleman, just a fantastic officer. And my caliche was never all that. You know, caliche is like Salvadoran hillbilly. But, you know, the gist of what I got was, and I won't translate it in perfect English, it was like, screw that guy. I'll chop that damn finger off. He ain't getting nothing. He's going to prison. So needless to say, Chispay didn't get his finger fixed. So he gets charged with murder in a Salvadoran court, gets tossed out of the naval infantry, is convicted of homicide, and goes to prison. Well, apparently back in those days, it ain't too hard to buy a guy out of prison for murder in El Salvador. So the SF guy who was the Rick Ryder in Usulatan, my buddy, who was, by the way, he was a great guy. He weathered out the attack with my team sergeant Tom Sneed and the Marines. His regional intelligence center was inside the compound. Like I say, I won't mention his name because of who he used to work for, but he'd been in Dede Berlin, was a super experienced SF operator on all levels. And when the attack went down, he booked out of the brigade and made his way to the team house because it was a more secure location. Because, there's a certain amount of, all the brigades, all the armed forces have a certain amount of infiltrators, which I think at times was like rated at anywhere like 3 to 8% of the Salvadoran armed forces were guerrilla infiltrators, essentially like sleeper agents. So my buddy had a good plan, fought his way out of the brigade and made his way to the team house to be with Tom Sneed and Hirsch Hernandez and Alfredo Longoria, the Marine officers. And they fought it out from there and got over there. But long story short is like my buddy, the O&I guy who ran the RIC down there, able to run agent nets and having access to funds and doing things like that, buys Chispay out of the Salvadoran prison. And I don't remember the exact figure, but as I recall, I was not impressed with how much money it took to buy a guy out of prison for murder. I don't think it was a couple $100 and maybe a couple packs of Lucky Strikes or something else like that.
Wow.
They bought Chispay out of prison. My buddy puts him to work for him, doing OGA stuff, finding, recruiting agents, finding weapons caches, running counter guerrilla patrols. And those guys get paid by the job, by weapon recovered and guerrilla capture and stuff like that. So Chispay, I think, probably prospered from the whole deal. He probably made more money working for OGA than he would ever have hoped to have made otherwise in El Salvador. So, I doubt any of those guys are still living, but, Chispay was the dude, man. And Chispay, if you're out there, ese loco vato mano Charlie Simon. I mean, you were the dude, man. If you didn't make it, man, I'm pouring a 40 out for you somewhere, dude, because you were legendary.
He sounds like a hell of a guy. I hope he is still around.
He was a good kid, but yeah. So that was one of the funnier stories. The other one in there, I think I don't know if you've got that. It also kind of peels into like that special access program. Somewhere in there, I sent you some pictures of the Gulf of Fonseca and place down there that was called Punta Ruca. Somewhere in there's some pictures like looking out there where you can see Tiger Island, which is a big volcano in the middle of the Gulf of Fonseca that kind of like, separates the Gulf between Nicaragua and Honduras and El Salvador. And somewhere in there, I gave you a picture of, it should be pretty obvious, of like a dead guy laid out on a slab.
I do have that. I was going to see if I could find, there is an island right here. I'll have to see if that's...
So good for, we talked a little bit about the terrain and, how close, El Salvador, a very, very teeny tiny country. Like I say, east to west, trying to travel the length of the country. If you could have done so, if it were possible, you could have driven one end of the country to the other in about 3.5 hours. But like I say, the network of support for the Salvadoran guerrillas, the FMLN, and the rest of the world, being that just across the Gulf of Fonseca is Nicaragua, which is run by the Sandinistas. Yeah, that's it. That's La Unión El Salvador. And that is from a site called Punta Ruca, which was one of the regional intelligence centers. And what you're seeing right in the middle of there is a dormant volcano called Tiger Island, which was a center for a lot of the interdiction missions on the water, with, trying to keep guerrillas and arms from coming from Honduras and Nicaragua into El Salvador. So, so anyway, another funny story that tells you about the war and what was going on over there. So the site down there was a regional intelligence center, which was being run by another friend of mine. Yeah, that's it right there. And I won't say his name again, not because he doesn't deserve recognition, but it's the nature of the program. And he was another one of those guys who, he'd come from CAG. And returned back to SF, and of course, selected for the El Sal mission because he was just such a stellar individual. That's all that neck of the woods you can see down over there. So I'm down there working with one of the local units, another naval infantry unit, and staying on the RIC compound. And one of the same Marine officers who was in the attack on Usulatan was down there as the advisor as well. Same guy. At that time, he was Captain Alfredo Longoria, who I have just the highest esteem for in the world. He was such a sharp guy. I'm down there working one time, and we have an adjacent compound, and we're over there, and there is this civilian family there. There's a man and a wife, somebody who's obviously like one of their like fathers and mothers, an older couple, and then 4 or 5 little kids running around inside our compound. And I'd just been there about a month before, and I didn't really understand who they were. Nobody really said anything. And I asked Captain Longoria, Fredo, I said, am I missing something here? Who are these people on our compound, on the compound of the Regional Intelligence Center? And he said, that's a funny story. He says, about a week after last time you were here, we were all standing out on the dock, and there was like a little dock that where we had a little like a sandbag bunker, where we would pull guard duty at night randomly, in case there were, like I say, there was a waterborne infiltration or attack. Standing out there, getting just about nightfall, and a pair of cayucas, which are dugout canoes, is slowly moving, being paddled by its occupants across the Gulf of Fonseca, and they make a beeline straight to this dock at the Regional Intelligence Center, of which there's nothing else around in this part of Lone Yun. And this scrawny dude gets out and he says, I'm here to surrender to the CIA. I am a Sandinista Army lieutenant in the intelligence branch, and so is my wife, and I've brought my whole family over to defect to America. Take me to the CIA, and I'll tell you all of our secrets.
Holy crap.
So, not an everyday occurrence that like a Sandinista intelligence officer tries to defect to us. Number one, it's kind of shocking is like, or not so shocking, I guess, that the nature of what the Regional Intelligence Center there must be known to the Sandinistas and thereby the rest of the communist world. So, that secret's out there, right? As the story goes on, the situation is this, of course, OGA gets involved, DIA gets involved, State Department gets involved, the ambassador gets involved. You got to know, you got all these people over here. We weren't at war with Nicaragua, so it's not like someone can defect out of Nicaragua. So the status of these 2 Sandinista lieutenants and their entire family, not even the State Department can come up with a status for them or what to do with them. So they stay right on the compound. So, I was down there all the time after that doing other things. So I saw the progression of what would happen. And these guys, I mean, they were like that thin, the first time I saw them. And, about 2 months later, every one of them must have put on like 30, 40 pounds. They got a stipend from whoever stayed or OGA or someone was paying them while they were debriefing them. And I'm sure getting like absolutely nothing worthwhile in the way of intelligence out of them. I can't imagine what they could have known that anybody would have even cared about, that you could have probably read in a newspaper, or, you could fly into Managua. It wasn't an Iron Curtain country. You could take a commercial flight from San Salvador to Managua or from anywhere in the world and walk around the damn city in the entire country. What the hell intelligence did they think they had that anybody would care about? So pretty funny. But yeah, so they were living on Uncle Sugar's dime. Pretty high on the hog. They decided that capitalism was a pretty good life, and they were putting on good weight and things like that. And anytime I was somewhere, I like to run around. Another guy who was down there at Punta Ruca was a SEAL independent duty corpsman, a buddy of mine, Bob Lemus, who, it's a lot of things in the special operations community. If you have a medical skill, along with all of your other skills as a special operator, people don't feel bad about putting you out by yourself somewhere, because they figure you can make commo, you can take care of any medical issue. We don't have to evacuate a guy. We don't have to send you help or something else like that. So Bob was down there. He was a graduate of Special Forces Med Lab. I'm going to show you what an outstanding guy he was. They sent him as a SEAL corpsman to Special Forces Med Lab without going through the Special Forces Medical Sergeant course.
Wow.
Which back in that days, that was like kind of the progression before you get to Med Lab. So that guy, he shows up to Med Lab, is a SEAL corpsman, and they throw him in the deep end where you're issued first day, you're issued goats as patients. You're having to draw labs. You're having to do you're having to do trauma scenarios. You're having to jump in and start doing surgery and anesthesia and stuff like that. And he'd never done any of that. And so to show you what a quality guy that was and how smart he was, he made it through that course, even though he had no adequate preparation like everybody else. So he was a very squared away guy, and just a great guy too. He was down there as an advisor to the Salvadoran SEALs, which, they were whatever. So where I'm going with this story is, one morning, early in the morning, I am up getting a cup of coffee. We have dogs on the counter. Oh, where I was going with that, where I forgot to say, is like, I would always be out in the Ville. I would always be in, I'd go out most evenings, go to the bar, me and Bob, talk to some long-haired dictionaries, have a beer, make it into the communities. Part of it is actually you're same thing with doing like, we would do like medical civic action programs in the local community, because it lets you get in, it lets you get to talk to people, it lets you get a sense of, who is where, what their status is. Are they sympathetic to us? Are they friendly? Are they likely guerrilla supporters? So it's a way of, it's another classic
rapport
mission when you can do civic action stuffs, roll it into an intelligence gathering operation, or even just informally getting a good feel for what the community immediately around you, what the temperature is. Are they likely to be the people who are going to help infiltrators move in and attack you? Are they more likely to be the people who are going to come and say, hey, there's something weird going on I need you guys to know about, because you gringos are good dudes. You know what I'm saying? But whenever I would be out and running around in La Union, I would see this Nicaraguan, I can't remember, call him Rudolfo. We'll call him Rudolfo to give him a name. I would see Rudolfo and his wife and their parents and the kids out on the town getting drunk, and they weren't prisoners. You couldn't keep them locked down. There wasn't any sense to all of that. But this leads up to one morning, I get up and I get a cup of coffee, and I'm standing out. Captain Longoria's up, Bob Lemus is up. We're just kind of getting the day going, going to go PT, just the sun's coming up. And one of the locals comes to our gate and waves us over, and you never know what this is about. So we go over, just a nice campesino, gentleman. And he says, "Do you guys have a red Toyota?" And we look, because we have a little lot just outside the gate where we do maintain some vehicles. And sure enough, out of the 3 or 4 civilian vehicles over there, the red Toyota is missing. I go, "Yeah, we do have a red Toyota and it's missing." He says, "Well, about 10 miles down the Pan American Highway headed towards Honduras, there's a red Toyota that looks like it smacked a horse on the highway, which is a 2-lane blacktop road, in the middle of the night, and there's a couple of dead people in there."
Oh.
So, long story short, we load up, we get out there to go and investigate this, and just like this concerned citizen says, middle of the road, there's a horse, wrapped in this vehicle, and in the driver's seat is our Nicaraguan defector, Rudolfo, clearly dead. And in the passenger seat is a young lady that he must have met on the town in one of our favorite bars, a prostitute. Both of their shoes have been stolen. The woman is still alive. Rudolfo is, DRT, dead right there. Clearly he had a basilar skull fracture. Stuff like that. The horse is clearly dead. The vehicle's not recoverable. So we extract the woman. We extract, Dickhead's body and bring her back in. The woman, the locals take charge for her to get her to the hospital. She was in bad shape. There wasn't too much I could do for her. I doubt she made it. But then we're stuck with Rudolfo. We take him back to the compound and lay him out in one of the rooms. And say, and my buddy who's, like I say, the SF guy who runs the RIC, everybody's like, "Well, I got to call my boss, his case officer, and we got to let people know what happened." And this kind of sets off a whole shitstorm of events. So that's kind of ended anything else that's going to go on that day. We've got to deal with this guy who's dead. And somewhere in there, I put a picture of him. It should be pretty obvious, but the family has to be notified. Yeah, there he is, Mr. Sandinista Lieutenant.
Woof.
Being drunk and not wearing a seatbelt and, pretty bad headlights and hitting a horse on the Pan American Highway in the middle of the night. Where the hell he was going, who even knows? There is nothing in that direction in La Union on the Pan American Highway. Was he just out for a joyride? Was he taking his hooker girlfriend and they were beating feet for Honduras or back to Nicaragua, or who even knows? Never figured it out. But now it's like, of course the wife is distraught. We try not to tell her, in the condition he was found and who he was found with. Try and spare her. The dad is there. What a dickhead I am. 2 seconds before I snapped that picture, I said, "Sonrei." I told him to smile. Well, I snapped that picture, turned around, and his dad was standing right behind him on the threshold. Yeah, I'm a class act. But the Salvadorans thought it was pretty funny. I didn't think too highly of this guy, but I felt bad for his family. Yeah. So long story short is, now what to do with him? We've got his body. He's kind of in custody of the United States government. And I don't know how it gets. I don't remember the exact, but all of a sudden I find myself with about a half a dozen eyes on me, and somebody says, "John, can you embalm him?" In my policy, it's like I say, as a special forces operator, is to, except in the most dire of circumstances, is to always say, "Yes, I can." I'd probably read about the embalming process somewhere once in my 18 Delta career. I never embalmed anybody. But the next question became is like, where the hell do we get embalming fluid in La Union, El Salvador? Let me tell you, it's not a very cosmopolitan place. But me and Bob Lemus, I don't even, there wasn't Google, hell, there wasn't even phones to speak of, oh my God. We somehow find an apothecary, like a chemist, and they direct us somewhere else. And the guy has like 1 gallon of formalin. So we, give him pocket change and take this gallon of formalin back. And by the time I got back there, one of the local doctors, military doctors, had showed up with a couple of his aid men. And I drained this guy's great saphenous and some of his other veins and fill him up as best as I can with formalin. And during this whole period of time now, it's like I say, people have filtered in, the case officer is there, OGA is there, people from the embassy have flown down, everybody's trying to get eyes on there. I get pulled out to be debriefed, for my expert forensic opinion on the nature of his death. Could it have been a complex assassination? Did the Sandinistas seek revenge against him? Was it, it got pretty fanciful, but I stuck to my guns. It was pretty clear that, he was, I'd observed his behavior many times. He was a useless drunk. He was with a prostitute, stole one of our vehicles and hit a horse in the middle of the night. So if he had anything useful to tell you, I hope you got it out of him, because you ain't getting no more out of him. And then the whole process began is, well, what's going to happen? It's like, now we have to go purchase a coffin for him. And it just went through several levels of escalation of, like finding the best grade casket to be paid for by OGA, where are they going to bury him? And during all this time, the months that the Sandinista family was there, the U.S. State Department had still not decided his status. They didn't know, it got down to the next day, the family decided they were going to take him back to Nicaragua to be buried. So the U.S. taxpayer paid to pack his casket into an aircraft at the international airport, and the whole family. And about 5 minutes after the wheels went up and they flew back to Nicaragua, the embassy received word from Washington, D.C. that the family's situation had been determined, that they would be economic refugees and they could emigrate to the United States. End of story.
Jesus. Oh my God.
The 2 stories that I've just told you, I know have never been told anywhere in any form before, and I'm probably one of the few people who could tell both. There's probably only 1 or 2 other people in the world who could tell those snippets of real history. That's, like I say, it's way more interesting, way more fun than gunfights. But that is the kind of world that El Salvador was, and the kind of stuff that would go on pretty much a weekly basis.
Oh my God, it's craziness, just crazy.
Good times. Yeah, you had asked me a little bit about like the Soldier of Fortune crowd. Mm-hmm. Soldier of Fortune magazine and stuff like that. I do have some, for Soldier of Fortune magazine, to anybody my age or a little bit younger, was a publication started in the 70s. I think it's still around. I'm certain it's still around. But, I know when I was a kid in high school, it was where you could read about daring do Vietnam adventures and Green Beret snake eaters. And, it was actually one of the only sources in the 70s about the Bush War in Rhodesia and things like that. And it was populated by a real cast of characters. But, all over Central and South America, it was not uncommon to run into the Soldier of Fortune guys, appearing in different areas. Have you've talked to guys before who've run into those sorts?
Oh yes, yes, sir. Some of the saga guys that ended up in Rhodesia, and a few force recon men that ended up in Rhodesia with the Salute Scouts ran into them and were instantly left the bar that as soon as they walked in and found out they were with Soldier of Force, and they were like, "We've got no time for tourists."
Pretty. They were not uncommon. You know, El Salvador had a lot of, in a way, was silent but had a lot of attention on it, or it was like a popular place, you know, for like that crowd to show up, and all those stories in the 1980s about, you know, Soldier of Fortune, you know, training Salvadoran military and, you know, going in and
hit squad,
you know, doing you know, arms repair and stuff like that to get, you know, machine gun sections running and stuff like that, you know. So they probably did some good where they went, but, you know, yes, they were avoided like the plague by all of us. But a guy who came around pretty often to El Salvador, who I became good friends with, was a guy named Barry Sadler, who that name probably wouldn't mean anything to you. You're kind of young, but Barry Sadler was Special Forces Vietnam vet who wrote the song "The Ballad of the Green Berets."
Oh yes,
and Barry became quite famous worldwide, but especially in the Special Forces community. I think little too young for me to remember, but I believe it was about 1966 or so. Ballad of the Green Berets went to #1 on the Billboard chart, and it supposedly sold, you know, millions and millions of copies, stuff like that. So it took this Green Beret and kind of catapulted him into fame. And then, you know, like the movie The Green Berets and Robin Moore's book The Green Berets, all that kind of came out to our detriment. But Barry Sadler was a pretty famous guy, and he was part of the Soldier of Fortune crowd during that period of the 80s, and he would show up in El Salvador from time to time, and I got to know him very well over that period of time, because of course he's an SF guy, he's a team guy. He would drop by our apartment in El Salvador, in San Salvador, in the capital, when I was in the capital, if I was in town, and would come and visit us. And he was very free to talk about, you know, he told us lots of stories about his life, about, you know, writing that song, and then it going to, like, you know, #1 and kind of catapulting him into fame. And he told us stories, you know, about he went on a worldwide promotional tour, promoting, because it was seen as a way to promote the Vietnam War, and it had DOD support and things like that. There's a really famous statue that used to be right next to the Special Warfare Center called Bronze Bruce, which is, you know, the Green Beret, and he's holding his hand out in, you know, offering help, and he's holding his M16 in one hand, and he's got his foot on a rock with a snake, and that's called Bronze Bruce. He told me the story that he went to the commander, and I can't remember the general's name, of the Special Warfare Center to get permission to go on his worldwide promotional tour and go on the Ed Sullivan Show and do things like that. And the general, like I said, whose name I forget, said, "I will give you permission if you give me a donation to build the Special Forces statue."
Wow.
And Barry, I can't remember, Barry told me it was even with all of that, I mean, he was not incredibly wealthy that early after the release of his song. But I want to say, I remember it's like the general extorted like a $20,000 or $30,000 check from him, which in 1966, $20,000 or $30,000, I think probably took him a long way towards getting the Bronze Bruce statue completed. So I heard that story directly from Barry Sadler, that anybody who's ever seen the SF Bronze Bruce statue, that Barry Sadler and the Ballad of the Green Berets paid for a good chunk of the Bronze Bruce statue.
Wow. That's a good little piece of insider history.
But Barry Barry would come down like a lot of that soldier fiction crowd, and he's the only one of those guys we would let around us because he'd been a team guy, of course, and he was always wanting to, he was always wanting to go out with us, and it's like, Barry, I can't take you out with me. That's not going to happen. Well, let me write a story about you. Well, that is definitely not going to happen. I was always amazed that like Barry would even ask. It's like, no, you're not going to put me and my partner's pictures in Soldier of Fiction magazine. Are you kidding me? Not only would blow everything about, our ethics and what we're supposed to be, but like we'd never live it down in the special forces community. No, you can't do a story about us. No. And this is the only thing I feel bad about. I'd actually tried to get him to let me take him to the military hospital to go do a story about the victims of the guerrilla mine warfare campaign, to get him on hand to see the number of mutilations and amputations caused by the guerrilla IED campaign in El Salvador that was receiving no coverage whatsoever. And I don't know, for whatever, he was just not interested in that. And that kind of bummed me out a little bit. When he told me no on that, I was just sick of him pestering us about wanting to do a story about us. And in Soldier of Fortune magazine, there was a big 2-page ad every month for the Barry Sadler self-defense method. He had a series of videotapes with Sensei Green Beret Barry Sadler to learn the Barry Sadler system of combat. And it was like, 10 VHS tapes for whatever, $79.99 and stuff like that. And, when I wasn't out in the bush, I train every day. Right. So I had just finally had my fill of this. And I said, and in our place where we had in the Capitol, I had a gym outside. I had heavy bags. I had makiwara. Me and my partner trained, sparred, did randori every day of some part for PT. And finally, I just had to say, Barry, we're really impressed with the Barry Sadler self-defense system. Come on out here to the gym and, hey, come on out, show us something. Come train with us. I can't wait to trade a little knowledge with you, Barry. That did it. He was gone. He was out the door, and I didn't see him for like another month. So when I look back at it now, that was a really dick move. Even back then, he was probably about, 10, 12 years younger than I am now, a guy in his late 40s, which, like I say, it was a dick move, but it achieved my goal, which was to get Barry out of my house without totally insulting him. And then, it wasn't but later that year in 1988 that I was in Colombia on a anti-drug counter-narco terror mission in Colombia when I read in the Miami Herald, which is how we used to get news back in those days, 2-day-old Miami Heralds, wherever you were, that Barry Sadler had been injured in a gunfight in Guatemala. That was in late 88. Mm-hmm. And I guess it was a really bad deal. I think he was a victim of a crime in Guatemala City, got shot, got, I think, a brain and a spine injury. And I think didn't have any health insurance. And I think the Soldier of Fortune people kind of rallied and got funds to get him flown to the United States and admitted to a hospital and get a high level of treatment. But the poor guy died, I think, not too long after that. So it was a very sad end to a guy. I don't mean to make him sound like he was a clown or nothing. He wasn't. He was very friendly to me. He wrote a whole series of books, the Casca, the Eternal Mercenary books. He told me the story, and he was very clear about it. He started the series when he was in jail for murder or manslaughter. Wow. He told me the story. He was, like I say, he was a team guy. He's very self-effacing. He said, yep, it's like he had a girlfriend who had a stalker of an ex-boyfriend hanging around her, and he shot him dead, supposing that the guy was armed. And as I recall the story, it turned out that the stalker that he shot to protect his girlfriend wasn't armed. And I think the complication was, I think he planted a pistol on the guy, and it really muddied the waters. Long and short, I think he only did a couple of months in jail before he got released. But while he was in there, he had access, I guess, to a typewriter and started writing those Casca Eternal Mercenary stories. So I got to know Barry pretty well as a result of my missions in El Salvador, and he was a real character.
One of many SF characters, to say the least. That's for sure.
There's a few of them out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say this last thing. The other guy who I would put in a completely different category, I won't mention those other Soldier of Fortune guys because I'll just leave it there. There was an American civilian who had been commissioned as a captain in the Salvadoran army, who was the advisor to the Airborne Battalion and advisor to the GOE, the Special Operations Group, which is the Salvadoran like Tier 1 reconnaissance unit, a guy named Harry Claflin. And I got to be good friends with Harry, and I had a lot of respect for him. And the Soldier of Fortune guys, made him semi-famous, writing about him and stuff like that. He was not part of the Soldier of Fortune crowd. He was a very, very committed anti-communist. He'd been a Vietnam-era Marine, and I don't remember the exact story of how he ended up in El Salvador as an advisor to the Salvadoran Airborne Battalion, but he did. And he was there probably as longer than any other American. And, because he was a civilian, he did not have the strictures that those of us working for the embassy did. And he went out on combat operations with his airborne battalion, and then was an advisor for their special operations group. And he had a very adaptable mind and a great tactical sense. And he was just a real gentleman. And eventually they commissioned him as a captain in the Salvadoran army. And he did a lot of good. And all the Salvadorans I knew in those units who worked with him thought very highly of Mr. Harry. And like I say, he was a great guy, and I got to spend, good time with him and had a lot of respect for him. So, those two people were the people I'd mention out of the Soldier of Fortune crowd. The rest of them I won't mention.
We've got two more El Salvador questions, and then we're wanting to kind of hear about some of the sniper school and some of the sniper competitions. But one of the last two we're dealing with, were there any other special forces casualties while you were in country during the war?
There were, and there was one incident that Greg Walker, who I mentioned before, who's been a very, very good historian of the special forces effort in El Salvador, wrote about an incident that was after his time but was during my time. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier because it created a policy that I think changed tactical operations in the country for a while. But down in La Union at the Central Military Training Facility, where there's usually a team of 3 to 4 SF advisors working out of the Central Military Training Facility in the summer of 87. I think it was July of 87. My company, Bravo Company, and Alpha Company had from 3rd Battalion 7 Special Forces Group had the El Salvador mission, where the guys who were going to El Salvador, however many of us there were, because there weren't team missions, we had it on a 6-month and 6-month basis, because you couldn't have anybody in country for more than 6 months without it screwing up the 55-man speed limit set on us by Congress to be in the country. But during the Alpha Company guys' rotation down there, the guys who'd been down at the SEMFA there was a accidental shooting that resulted in a special forces guy named Tim Hodge getting shot in the neck. It was a bad situation. I talked to a witness on the team who, told me what he witnessed, and the guy who did it never got proper justice. I believe there was malice and not just carelessness. And I hate to, litigate these things in a public forum now, almost 40 years later. But the guy who shot Tim Hodge, should have been hung out to dry, and he wasn't.
God.
It created a series of events that led to a lot of deaths. The guys in the Capitol launched a rescue mission to fly from San Salvador, from Ilopango Air Base, which is in San Salvador, up in the mountains, down to the Gulf of Fonseca, de La Union, to render aid and stabilize Tim and bring him back to the military hospital. They didn't make it. Inclement weather, the bird crashed into the side of the mountain not too far from Ilopango, killed the entire air crew, killed the SF light colonel from the embassy. And the only survivor was a friend of mine, another 18 Delta, Tommy Grace, who was on one of our scuba teams in A37. And he had he managed to survive, drag himself out of the wreckage. I think he was thrown out of the helicopter, managed to make his way down the mountain to, like the first village and get some help. And I don't think he retained any real memory of the events and things like that. But as I recall, and I could be wrong about this, and, it was one of those things, even at the time, it was really hard to pick out what happened, but a rescue mission from the military hospital in the eastern part of the country, from San Miguel, which was only like a half hour away from La Union, simultaneously launched a bird, went, picked up Tim Hodge, and took him to San Miguel. The mission that launched from Ilopango, where all those guys got killed needlessly and Tommy Grace got messed up, never needed to happen. And it was all basically due to, malice, carelessness, incompetence on the part of the shooter, who paralyzed Tim Hodge for life. He lived, but, was quadriplegic the rest of his life. But that initiated a formal policy by the Mill Group commander, who was an excellent, excellent gentleman, who it's hard to fault his decision given the facts that he had on hand, but that there was just not the communications capability, there was not the air assets available to launch rescue missions, in non-daylight hours. So very sad. Then as far as that was very major. That was very major and very sad. Need never have happened. But there were other special forces casualties during the war, that I was present for. But this is the only way I can. Being an 18 Delta, is part of the hat that I was wearing in country at the time, was pretty easy for us. It was what we would call demo man first aid. It's either a Band-Aid or a body bag. Anything that we could take care of ourselves without having to involve a higher level of medical authority, I took care of. Me and on that one mission, my partner, Doug, we took care of. If a guy was, out on a patrol, if he, got wounded by an IED, if something else like that happened, the priority was on keeping it quiet so it didn't affect the mission. Guys, the SF guys, everybody, nobody was trying to hunt glory. Nobody was trying to hunt recognition. Nobody was trying to get Purple Hearts or CIBs or something else like that. If a guy picked up a small wound or something like that, I would treat him. or Doug would treat them, or they'd start by treating themselves and do things like that, rather than say, oh, I got wounded, bring me in, put me in for a Purple Heart and stuff like that. That would have brought restrictions, attention, would have interfered with the mission. And it was just a very unspoken, adhered to rule that you didn't do anything like that. You didn't do it. A lot of gunshot wounds and a lot of things like that, even from M16s, if that's come from any distance, and it only, past the first 100 yards, like back what we used in those days, like 55 grain, M193 ball, the wounding capacity, or especially the ability to create like secondary cavities and to devitalize tissue and stuff like that, past about 100 yards, really hard to do. So if a guy caught a small wound or a bullet that passed through an intermediate barrier, as long as it wasn't in the chest or the abdomen, that it's just in an extremity, most of that stuff, you don't even have to surgically treat it. You can just clean it locally, put a dressing on it, and put them on oral antibiotics. Even closer, I can't even tell you the number of times in my life then and after as an orthopedic surgeon, this happened in El Salvador all the time, where somebody'd say like, there would be either an accident or there would be, like I say, a result of like an infiltrator, activating himself and going crazy and shooting somebody, or, the smaller attacks or something else like that, where it's like, doc, someone's been wounded. It's like, all right, put the car 15 away, grab my aid bag, run. Where's the guy who's wounded? There's a guy sitting there smoking a cigarette. Right here, man. Where'd you get shot? I got shot in the leg, but doesn't feel too bad. If that projectile didn't strike bone and didn't strike it with enough velocity to cause a fracture and secondary missiles from the bone, most of those wounds could, like I say, you didn't even have to surgically debride them. You didn't have to do nothing. Clean them damn things out, put a dressing on them, put them on oral antibiotics, keep them off that limb for, until it feels better, and you didn't have to do nothing. So essentially, there were a lot of things that happened where guys got wounded in a variety of ways and never said shit about it, because it would have caused problems at the level of the mill group, would have caused problems. The embassy, the State Department would have reflected badly on our leadership back in Panama at 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group. So a lot of that stuff, it just happened and we dealt with it. And it's like I say, we always used to say, it was just the tacit understanding. You're not supposed to be on patrols. You're not supposed to be in combat action, but there's a certain level where you just have to do what you have to do to maintain the credibility and the confidence of the people you're working with. And, Band-Aid or a body bag, if you got killed, there's nothing, like Greg, there's nothing anybody could do about it. And, too bad, for the other guys, it's like I say, you picked up a little something here or there, something we can deal with ourselves. Nobody needs to know anything about it.
Wow. We're going to be coming up on 2 hours here shortly. I've got an idea for questions 9 and 10 because they're multi-part. I think we can actually get another show that would be very intriguing on that. But to close out, we are definitely wanting to hear about you. From what I understand, you're a plank holder with the sniper school, and we're wanting to hear about that, as well as the work you're still doing with the sniper community. Could you talk to us about that before we close out for the day?
Yeah, my history. Yes, I'm a plank holder, 1987, class 487 of the U.S. Army Sniper School at Benning. Very proud at that. It's likely I'm there you go. very interesting. I can go on and on about this. We can talk about it at other times too. But I'm probably the first combat deployed graduate of that school. Right after that, I had a quickie mission with a team on the border of Venezuela and Guyana, which was a very interesting mission in and of itself. But immediately coming back from that is I picked up a 6-month El Salvador mission, and the story of how I took an M21 system to El Salvador and what I did there is a little lengthy. But the NCOIC of the sniper school at that time, the first NCOIC was a guy named Bill Knox, and he and I hit it off, and we became very good friends. And I was top gun graduate of my sniper class and got invited by the NCOIC of the Army Marksmanship Unit 1,000-yard team, got invited to join the 1,000-yard team, which of course I was never going to give up being on an A team to join the AMU. But I ended up not going back to Panama immediately afterwards, and I ended up sticking around for about a week at Benning, and we actually trialed what at that time was the XM24, what became the M24, and I got to participate in the early testing of that, and I just really hit it. We're all gun guys. I grew up working in a gun shop. I grew up as an apprentice gunsmith and grew up as a high power shooter in eighth grade through high school, and was an early IPSC shooter and stuff like that when I joined the Army. So all just very natural to me. And I just hit it off with those guys. And Bill Knox and I, took in a local gun show in Columbus before I hit back, and we exchanged Christmas cards for years and years. And he ran a pack guide service out of Idaho after he retired. And we eventually lost touch. He died several years ago. But when I was in El Salvador, I sent Bill back, the photos that I had taken. I sent back, local stuff that I had captured, sent it back to go back to the schoolhouse and be part of the mission. I was a guest speaker about a year ago for one of the sniper school graduations there at Benning. I'm back there all the time, but I ended up being a guest speaker and helped to graduate a great class of guys down there, stuff like that. Come to find out, they have the records of all of our classes going back to everything after that first year. All that stuff I sent Bill, all the photos, the only ones that all the stuff that, captured stuff and guerrilla propaganda and stuff like that. I sent him the schoolhouse burned to the ground, and all of that stuff burned with it. So that picture, I had one picture of class 487 sniper school graduation that I passed on to the sniper school cadre to try and reconstruct that early history of the sniper school. But have been a contractor and a weapons and tactics trainer for CQB, assaulter and sniper operations for the last 20 years for law enforcement in the DOD. And I run a continual contract at Benning with the Warrior Training Center, where they are very, very active in preparing National Guard Army sniper teams for the International Sniper Comp and the WPW Sniper Comp and other comps. And the gentleman who runs that program is very modest, who wouldn't want me to mention his name, has contracted me, and I'm down there several times a year working with their sniper teams, helping to train them up for competition. And our teams do very, very well. Team I've worked with now about 3 years, finished third this year. We thought they were going to win. My boys came in second in ISC last year, so we really felt that this was their year, but they've got nothing to hang their head about. A team from third group won this year, and they did an outstanding job. Really proud of those guys. So yeah, I get to do really cool, fun stuff still. Clearly my knowledge base didn't begin and end in 1987. It's just something I've, with all of my other tactical skills, I've had to learn, train, develop, improve, and fortunately it's something I've been able to do all of my life.
And just bringing up your sniper video here.
I think that's just a little. So to be there and coach, we had 4 teams. We had 4 teams this year from Train Through Warrior Training Center. My boys there, Max and John, took 3rd. It broke their heart, but I'm proud as hell of them. Like I say, 2nd place last year, 3rd place this year. They're the best snipers in the world. And our other 3 teams finished. I'm going to blow out. I think they finished 6th, 7th, and 8th. 6th, 7th, and maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. But it's like I say, out of like almost 40 teams from all services and international, we consistently have very good placings.
That's I think I just finally found the final placings for it. Yeah, there we go.
Like I say, great guy. Our dudes from 3rd Group 1, and they made me super proud. They were in a final shoot off with guys from 375 who were utterly fantastic. The international teams were all fantastic guys, just like every year. ISC is a really, really fantastic event. It's run by the U.S. Army Sniper School cadre, who are just fantastic individuals. And I think this is the best comp they've ever run. It was the stages were fantastic. Everything was run so efficiently. Those guys, my heart swells. I'm down there many times a year, and all of those dudes know me and, treat me, like I'm one of their own and stuff like that. So it's like I say, I'm really lucky. Cool things keep happening to me, even if they shouldn't. So,
that's so cool. And I was gonna see. We've still got we're about to hit the 2-hour mark, and I've got some stuff to take care of.
Yeah,
but
man.
I was gonna see.
Nobody wants to listen to me talk for this.
No, God, this is exactly what we're here for. This is great stuff. But we've got 3 or 4 more good questions, and I think we could do a part 3 if you'd like to, talking about some of the more Latin America drug operations and maybe the Colombia National Police or the Che Guevara incident.
Sure. I wasn't there for killing Che, but I was with the Bolivian Ranger Battalion at one point in their illustrious career. And with all the counter narco terror and anti-drug operations and our war on drugs during those years. And then, you want to talk more about like sniper training and sniper operations and, the things I do with like doing live fire sniper assaulter integration for U.S. Law enforcement special operations. Yeah, happy to talk about all that stuff.
That would be awesome. Maybe I'll have to check with your calendar, but maybe here in the next week or 2 or something, whenever you get time and get some free time to join us again.
Can do, my brother. It's my honor. You've extended a significant opportunity that on behalf of me and my generation and special forces operators, the work you do as a historian is just peerless in its importance, and what a good job you do getting this recorded before we're all gone.
Coming from you veterans, that means the absolute world to me. So I just thankful enough that you guys trust me enough to come on and talk and share y'all's history with us. So it means the world to all of us. So I'll stay in touch, and we'll get us another
Sure.
date set up, and we'll have another good part 3 set up.
I'll do my best.
Yes, sir. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll be in touch with you.